accidentally had my sound on. Shout out to Jake Adams in the chat, you're in first place. Alright, it's your boy, you're listening to my sheet music in the background. I don't have a song for this yet. Yeah, and I'm hearing myself. Because, yeah, you know, I need a song, I need intro music, so I just got this little jazz thing I made in Guitar Pro 7, so we'll get a song eventually, but for now you have my, automatically, you have my sheet music I made. Yeah, someone called that out earlier, the last stream, which is funny. So yeah, we got Jake Adams in the chat. You're in first place, and I'll announce who's in second and third place as people join, which may or may not even happen. You know, I got my Monster White energy drink this week. Just got some in my eye, and it stings. Great way to start the stream, god damn it. It's so funny. I'm wearing a short sleeve now because last time I did this, I was so nervous. I was literally like sweating and I was like wiping sweat off my forehead like the whole time. So yeah, and unlike last time where I had something to eat before we started, tried to make myself full and, you know, kind of ease the anxiety a bit. Today I got 2 energy drinks in me, no food. I'm feeling like I'm ready to rob a liquor store, you know, so we're gonna do this shit before the crank wears off. And, yeah, but yeah, we got a good one, good topic this week. It's something that I am very fascinated by. And a lot of the topics we're gonna talk about today, I believe, are quite elementary. Like, these are things that somebody should learn if they're interested in politics, before they kind of go down any rabbit hole or decide on, you know, an ideology. But of course, people don't make that much of a premeditated choice when, like, picking their worldview. They kind of get exposed to different types of media and then usually end up just consuming a lot of media that maybe confirms pre-existing biases and prejudices and intuitions that they have. And by the time they actually learn these concepts, it's already like they already exist in, you know, a well-established worldview of, you know, that they believe with high confidence. So, yeah, you know, welcome everybody. We got Sapara Auto. I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. He's in second place. I know him from the Digital Gnosis Discord. And this stream is going to be very inspired by Digital Gnosis because he made a video that I quite liked, reacting to Russell Brand's chat with Sam Harris. And I'm someone who very much sympathizes and relates to Nathan from Digital Gnosis's kind of like intellectual trajectory. The difference being that he was someone who put a lot of thought into his kind of ideas, where I'm someone who kind of just got there more so by mentally checking out of politics. Another inspiration for this stream was the YouTube channel Then and Now. Then and Now made a video on Russell Brand called The Fall of Russell Brand, which kind of goes into the conspiratorial ideation that we see with Russell as a figure. Now, just disclosure, I'm someone who only ever watched a Russell Brand video for the first time this week. So I'm not somebody who was ever a follower of him or that familiar with him and the types of beliefs that he has. And so today we're going to watch the first video that I saw from Russell Brand, which is simply the one that he last uploaded, which was one on the vaccine for the pandemic. Yeah, and we have nobody in third place yet. But yeah, so so the kind of goal of this is going to just be more of a discussion around several concepts that I find useful, such as media literacy and being aware of tribalism, and just also as well the kinds of styles of thinking that we find in conspiracy theories and other types of fringe views. And by styles of thinking, I simply mean like the way in which people form beliefs and not necessarily the actual content of those beliefs themselves. And so that's going to be the topic of today's stream. I don't have like a super, rigid plan that we're going to go through. But yeah, so I hope everybody enjoys and kind of sticks around. And one of the kind of inspirations for this stream as well was when I was watching that Digital Gnosis live stream, he brought up a study that I found very interesting. And that study was on this concept of polarization and opinion dynamics. And it was kind of, like polarization is this issue that we all talk about. It's, a big topic of concern for people is that we kind of exist in this deadlock of debate where more and more so issues are becoming defined along partisan lines where you have to pick a side, and that more and more of the conversation isn't just about putting forward your values and what you think are the best policies, but also having a kind of paranoia, resentment, and contempt about the other side of the political aisle that you don't agree with. And so this article I read earlier in the week was actually about how it's not... A lot of people have tried to attribute polarization in society to this idea known as the echo chamber hypothesis, which is this idea, as the name suggests, that people kind of go down these rabbit holes through in the digital media landscape where they're only consuming content of people who already agree with them. And then this study kind of challenges that by actually trying to look at the data on the issue, do a lot of statistical analysis that is quite complex and above my pay grade, where they find that actually people are exposed quite frequently to people they disagree with in today's media landscape, and actually this is a driver of polarization in many ways, because essentially people aren't able to entertain or engage with people they disagree with in good faith. And so what kind of happens is there's this causal process for polarization where people see these ideas they don't agree with and are kind of fashioned and socialized by their side to find those ideas they don't agree with worthy of contempt and loathing, and likewise for the people who believe those things that they don't agree with. And so this is all going to kind of come together because really I think how one of the issues that comes with polarization and this partisan sorting referring to that process by which beliefs, values, issues and so on get turned into this two-side debate where you have to pick a side, and then much of the conversation becomes not just about the issue, but how the other side that you don't agree with, is worthy of contempt, and it becomes this issue of tribalism. And that way that polarization and partisan sorting creates tribalism is something that I also want to focus on in this stream. And, before we get in, just remember to tell me if we have technical issues or if anything goes wrong, because again, I'm quite new to this and I'm going to need everybody's help. Alright, so before we begin, I wanted to play a video by Josh L. Rasmussen. And he's a Christian philosopher, and he's one of the probably strongest Christian thinkers out there right now. And this video is called How to Ruin Your Worldview, and it's essentially going to come down to a lot of the styles of thinking that I want to illustrate today as being quite undesirable. And so I wanted to play this video in its entirety. And also as well, the fact that Josh is a Christian, I think like when people, who are Christian today might often be considered as exhibiting a lot of these styles of thinking. I think this is useful to show that we're not necessarily talking about the actual contents of your beliefs and saying that, like that, oh, if you disagree with me, it's you're an idiot or anything like that. This is somebody who is a Christian who exhibits the very types of values that I would want to promote. And I can name many other people that do that as well. And so I think that's kind of like a useful starting point. And so I'll play this video and then kind of move through examples of how what Josh is illustrating in this tend to play out with other types of beliefs.
So I want to just share with you how you can ruin your worldview, how you can increase your stock of false beliefs and minimize your true beliefs. 3 tips, 3 strategies you can use to ruin your worldview. First, when you have a belief and you find somebody else who disagrees with your belief, assume that they are unreasonable. Maybe you've got reasons for your belief, and so you've got to assume then that they don't have other reasons, maybe things that you could learn from, things that you haven't considered, but instead treat them as unreasonable. This will ensure that they won't want to help you to see new things because they won't even want to have a conversation with you. Or if they do say something back, they might just call you unreasonable. And so this will lead to polarization and the crumbling and ruining of your worldview. The second thing that you can do to increase your stock of false beliefs is spend a lot of time exposing the problems in other people's beliefs. Spend more time critiquing and analyzing beliefs that you think are false than critiquing and analyzing your own beliefs, things you already think are true. This will ensure that you will find the specks in other people's eyes and totally miss the plank in your own eye. And so the false beliefs that you have, you'll never see them, and that will continue to happen in your mind and block you then from correcting a false thinking in your own thinking.
Now, I just wanted to stop and interject here where I could see how somebody could hear that point that Josh just made of not being critical of your own views and only applying criticism to other people. But I've actually been guilty of a lot of the things we're going to be talking about today. And so when I actually do this stream, a lot of this is kind of talking to myself. I'm somebody who, my kind of like narrative of my life is one where I believe I was a gullible person who struggled a lot with gullibility without actually realizing it until many years later. And so a lot of the stuff that I'm saying is really me kind of almost talking to myself, especially like my younger self, because I definitely think that I learned a lot of this too late and I exhibit some of the personality traits that we're going to talk about today that make someone inclined to believe the types of things that we're going to be looking at. So yeah, I was just clarifying that to say that a lot of this is self-criticism in this stream, and it's not just me trying to write off people that I don't agree with.
A third thing to do to ruin your worldview is to let other people think for you. Be part of a group and let that group tell you how you should think. So for example, if you feel like you're associated with a particular political party and somebody whom you respect cites a scientific source that supports existing beliefs you have, automatically assume that that scientific source is credible and that the person who's citing that is reliable. Don't check it for yourself. Just believe. Just believe along with your group. Never critically think about your group. And for sure, don't spend time in another group, being friends with them, seeing what it's like to be them.
So I wanted to touch on this idea of when... so firstly, we have sapere in the... And I'm really sorry if I not pronounce that wrong. Like, feel free to tell me how it's... any apologies for that if that's the case. Lol, please send me this video on Discord. I will do. I'll link it to you after I'm done with this. It's a great video. But there's this idea that of when your side sends you like a scientific article or something, to just assume that it's correct and that the methodology is good and that it's a good study. And then when the other side does it, to just immediately assume that they've gone wrong somewhere. And actually, I think this is very tied to another concept we're going to talk about today, known as media literacy. So what is media literacy? Media literacy is essentially this idea to be able to approach the media through a critical and skeptical lens, and being able to discern false information from true information. And usually the easiest way to achieve this is by consuming media from a large array of sources, so that you don't find yourself guilty of what Josh is talking about. And there's actually quite a lot of literature on this concept of media literacy. Usually these studies involve giving people false news headlines and true news headlines, and then seeing who is able to discern the good information from the bad information, and then seeing if that ability to do that correlates with other beliefs or personality traits and behaviors. And so I wanted to look at some of that data today because it's very interesting. In general, media illiteracy is going to be kind of a theme of that I wanted to talk about in this video. And I think it also ties into another concept, which is known as epistemic arrogance. And epistemic arrogance is essentially the overestimation of one's own expertise and knowledge on an issue. A classic example of this was when you look at like young Earth creationists, and somebody will call themselves like a flood expert, meaning that they're like an expert on Noah's Ark and the literal interpretation of the flood story in the Bible, where that person is obviously overestimating their knowledge on the issue, because like being a flood expert isn't really a thing, as most people would agree. Like, and I don't mean just an expert in like floods in general, obviously those exist, but to be an expert on a story in the Bible and your particular interpretation of it, where it's almost guaranteed that you have not done the level of work required for like this a person in the scientific community has in order to kind of make statements on floods and these kinds of natural processes. So that would be an example of epistemic arrogance. And all of these things that I'm talking about, these concepts I'm putting forward, these are all kinds of ways of forming beliefs that I'm positing, and many others have posited, are kind of what defines a conspiracy theory. And that's kind of what I'm getting to by saying all of this. Because conspiracy theories, that term is something that is thrown around a lot, and there's kind of an opinion, and I think there is some validity to this concern, is that it's a word that's thrown around to delegitimize people that you don't agree with. And that's true. I've seen that done. It is a word that is callously used. And there are a lot of words like that where people abuse them, and they use them to lazily dismiss people so they don't have to engage those ideas. But I think the word still is necessary and has utility, because it picks out something in the world that needs to be understood and explained. And that is people who hold theories that are about a conspiracy theory, but don't actually hold the same types of like intellectual values that we would in, say, the sciences or in other fields where we tend to think we have very good theories about how the world works. And so what we're going to see is that conspiracies happen all the time. Watergate is a classic example, like the World Wars, it happens all the time. You could even talk about a lot of stuff in the pharmaceutical industry where you see conflicts of interests and, advisory boards that work for the government being populated by people who are employed by private pharmaceutical companies, stuff like that. Like, maybe not a conspiracy is a good word for that, but you see nefarious stuff happening all the time in the world. And just because you believe a theory about that doesn't actually make you a conspiracy theorist. What I'm going to argue, and that others have argued, is that a conspiracy theorist is a person who has a particular style of belief, a way of coming to those conclusions about the world that doesn't match our best theories that we have about other things. So that's kind of what I want to explore today. And then also kind of like, what is the type of person generally that believes these things? But let's continue with Josh's video.
This way, you will ensure that your beliefs that are not true, not matching up with reality, are never exposed to be false, and you continue to build a faulty thinking. All of these 3 tips have in common tribalism. So if you want to just remember how to ruin your worldview, just think of this word tribalism. If you're tribal, that means that you seek, instead of truth, you seek maintaining a tribe. You protect your people. This is why you believe what your people believe. This is why you don't spend time criticizing your own thoughts or the thoughts of your people. Instead, you focus on people outside your tribe. This will help ruin your worldview. If you instead seek truth, that can liberate you from tribalism, but then the problem there is you might begin to have more true beliefs, and you might begin to weed out your false beliefs. So you don't want to do that if you want to ruin your worldview. I hope this is helpful to you.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of Josh. Josh is if you're interested in like Christian philosophy, definitely check him out. Which is not to say like this should go without saying, but it's not to say like I agree with him, but I just like listening to him and I enjoy the way he thinks, and I think he's a good faith actor and, all of that. So we're going to take some of these concepts, and I wanted to look at Russell Brand. He's someone who's kind of been blowing up in the last few months. Then and Now made a video on him where he kind of goes through a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about today, and hopefully try to add some of my own insights. I thought this was a really great video. If you're into philosophy, check out Then and Now. It's a channel I've watched for a few years now and I'm a big fan of. And he kind of goes into a lot of the psychology behind conspiracy theories, which is something that's very well studied in the literature, and we're going to find that there is certain things that predict conspiratorial beliefs, such as narcissism. But before we do that, I thought we could go through a Russell Brand video, and this was just the last one that he uploaded, so maybe that is a good way to kind of just go in random and not try to like cherry pick a particularly bad video by Russell Brand or anything like that, but just try to be like, well, I'm not going to be able to show his whole channel, obviously, so just going with the last video he uploaded seems fair, where I think I'm not just cherry picking like the worst thing he has to offer. Literally just the last thing he uploaded, and it's called Now It Makes Sense. And you can kind of get a sense that with a lot of his video titles, he's uploaded a new one since I decided to go through this, but whatever, we'll just stick with the one I picked. So, oh shit, Fauci knew this all along. Oh shit, they're coming for American citizens. He's finished. Oh shit, they killed it. It's over. Like, you can see that a lot of these titles, and I get it that a lot of it's like SEO and clickbait and stuff that is just important from a marketing perspective, and that's just a part of the game, and I'm not going to hold someone accountable for doing, or like hold that against somebody, but they do definitely look very alarmist, and that they're trying to kind of promote the types of paranoia we're going to see that are a very essential ingredient for believing in conspiracy theories. Like these titles are pretty alarming. And by alarming, I don't mean like I'm alarmed that he's doing it. even if that might be true. I mean, they're designed to read them and instill this sense of like fear and paranoia. And we're going to see that like immediately as he starts talking. And so I'll speak more on that in a moment.
The media receives from Big Pharma, don't you? Well, how would you feel if you found out that the federal government also paid the media to promote vaccines during the pandemic? Well, I feel like something very suspicious was going on.
So we're going to see straight away, he says, I cut out a little bit of that. He says, you know how much money the legacy media gets from Big Pharma, right? And we're going to see straight away that there's this kind of, and this would be an example of being media illiterate, where that is true what he's saying. I actually wrote my grad paper to graduate from university on the pharmaceutical industry and criticizing firstly pharmaceutical corruption, but also other practices like medicalization and disease mongering. And these refer to or the latter concept, the construction of new diseases and the broadening of diagnostic criteria in order to make more and more people qualified for certain diagnoses in order to essentially sell pharmaceuticals. And I wrote my grad paper on that. So I'm someone who is definitely critical of like the pharmaceutical industry, right? And there is definitely like room for a discussion about that. And so I'm definitely like, you know, a lot of people who are like lost in the source, who consume like Russell Brand videos and stuff, are going to be people who are setting up this like tribalistic dichotomy of us versus them, where they are the people who are skeptical and critical and care about truth, reason, and goodness and so on. And then the other people who disagree with them essentially just like, for lack of a better word, take it up the arse, where they're just like, oh, I do everything pharmaceutical companies tell me and what the legacy media says. And if you don't agree with this, like, you need to be put in jail. And I'm just trying to break up that black and white thinking and that like dichotomous thinking and say like, no, like I'm someone who's, I literally wrote this to graduate on all my criticisms of this stuff and went through the issues that the pharmaceutical industry has. But the vaccine is safe, like for most people, for the vast majority of people, there's a lot of data on this to say that it's a good idea to take the vaccine with very few exceptions. I got Superior saying it also gives people a sense of positive valence when they feel like their views are validated. Yeah, for sure. And so, yeah, the point I was going to make when I paused this was that Russell Brand says straight away, you know how much money the legacy media gets. And so a part of being media literate is being able to see how products of the media are constructed with different motives and interests in mind, which is part of the reason why it's important to actually get your news from a large variety of sources and not just like one place. And it's a symptom of media illiteracy for somebody to watch this and agree with that statement, which is true. A part of being media literate is knowing that the media is funded by different interest groups and so on. But then like we can literally cut to him doing his ad read here of like Sticker Mule or whatever. So just cut to this.
We've teamed up with them again to create 10,000 of these limited edition packs. There are 6 stunning designs. Look, you might...
And so like, you know, I'll just mute it and play it because it's kind of funny to show the contrast. And then to not have that same skepticism towards someone like Russell Brand, who makes like a shit ton of money from these views that he peddles. And it might be like a different business model than like the mainstream media, but nonetheless, like there's this clear monetary incentive that he has to be able to, you know, promote these views and to just not be critical of that at all, and to take everything he says with a grain of salt or just as like one thing amongst like a large variety of different sources, shows that you are media illiterate. So yeah, that's not good. And I'm going to get into some of the data on this as well, which kind of shows my point that actually we have good reason to think that people who believe this stuff are media illiterate. But for now, I just thought, you know, we'll make it through the video.
like something very suspicious was going on. Well, get ready. Hello there, you awakening wonders. Thanks for joining me on our voyage to truth and freedom. A voyage we must undertake together. We must wake up now. There is no time to lose. You're aware. You feel it too. You know this is the moment where we can no longer allow ourselves to be subject to tyranny and incremental increases in global power, all presented as convenient or safe or somehow in order to protect the vulnerable. We know now that authoritarianism is on the rise. It's not in the form of militant dictatorships, but technological dictatorships, always seemingly in order to advance your safety and your convenience, as in today's story.
That's crazy. Like, that is like, and what I mean by that is the framing there. Like, if you watch this, and this is like where you get your information from, and every time you're about to get like a story, you get this like, they're coming for you, there's tyranny afoot, they're authoritarian, like we're on a voyage to freedom and truth, and everybody else, it's like, damn, like this is so transparent. Yeah, we have the Margot saying word salad lol, and congrats, you're in 3rd place in the chat. Good to see you. You know, like this is so transparent to me that if somebody talked to me like this in a YouTube video, like I'm seeing right now, kind of redundantly, like if I hear people talk to me like this, I just think snake oil salesman. Like, that is crazy what he's doing there. Like, that is so transparent. I like, you know, just, I'm amazed by that. That was actually pretty wild.
Story, the federal government paid media organisations to promote vaccines during the pandemic. It's as simple as that. During the time where people that were hesitant, suspicious about new, untrialed medications were shamed and told that they shouldn't be allowed admission into hospitals, amidst the plethora, almost too numerous to count, of untruths around whether or not they prevented transmissions or even were trialled, where it came from, whether or not certain information was repressed or suppressed, whether young people needed to take it, how effective booster shots were, whether or not deaths were being recorded properly, whether or not adverse injuries, all of that stuff. Additionally, your government, that means your money, because remember, your government's money is your money. They don't have any independent money, and when they get it, they invest it pretty quickly in the stock market, let me tell you. Curiously, into big pharma companies. They were spending taxpayer dollars promoting vaccines through the media. This is an extraordinary story and revelation. It's not been widely reported. I wonder why.
I mean, like, it's not widely reported. I mean, maybe it's not. I'm going to just take that on face value. But, and this is like a criticism of Russell Brand that Then and Now makes, is that he will, like, kind of take small stories that aren't that significant and blow them up to be, you know, worthy of a lot more attention than that they kind of deserve, because it makes complete sense, everything that he's saying. Like, of course, during a global pandemic where we need to roll out a vaccine, that the government would pay media companies to promote it. And if you look, this is like the whole dilemma of all public, because like there's a lot of data on the vaccine, right? It's one of the most studied drugs in human history. And with all drugs, there's always this dilemma that like the vast majority of the literature, or I shouldn't say the vast majority because I don't actually know the numbers on this, but it's a huge issue that largely how studies that get done is that, you know, private companies fund them, they're looking for a certain conclusion, and that a large amount of the literature that is not published is because it doesn't reach that conclusion that they're looking for. And so usually every study that gets published on medications and drugs comes from some kind of, you know, private interest. It's very common for that to be the case. And it means that you actually have to still engage with the data, and you can't just dismiss it and say, well, like the government promoted this through the media. You know, that's very often the case with many drugs. We got Sapira saying, why would it be unusual for the government to fund pro-social messaging? That's one of the things I would expect the government to do. Exactly right. Like, this doesn't surprise me, and I can't imagine anyone who's like literate on this stuff hearing that and then having any form of like cognitive dissonance or being like, wow, that's crazy, like this doesn't make sense on my worldview, you know. Again, the only reason why I think that somebody would find this problematic is because they have extremely anti-government paranoid beliefs where they kind of believe in a conspiracy where every time the government does something, it has bad intentions. And you can see him kind of like these libertarian talking points like trickling through here of like the government has no money, it only has your money and things like that. And I think it's all to just kind of to make the paranoia do most of the work rather than an actual like evidence of some kind of foul play or conspiracy.
That would be perhaps because it shows that the government and the legacy media are cooperating to bring about conditions where ordinary people have limited access to information and are exposed to information that is subsequently proven to not be true. Let's get into this story. Remember, we stream every day at these times. We'd love you to join us there because this movement needs to move fast. So this first commercial was paid for by the Department of Health.
Again, the idea of like a movement would be an example of partisan sorting, I think, where it's pretty much impossible for someone to watch what Russell says and believe it without also then being a part of this us versus them dynamic where, you believe the them. So in this case, like the establishment or the media or the government are worthy of contempt. And so he is deliberately trying to engage in partisan sorting and creating tribalism.
Health and Human Services. Or another way of saying that is you paid for this.
Luis and Roberta think they got COVID at dance class. Mike thinks he got it at his family reunion. Nancy blames the carpool. One thing they have in common, their natural immunity has worn off.
Natural immunity is worn off. Natural immunity will do that to you. Just wears off. Unlike this vaccine that we're paying for, you're paying for, and this advert that we're paying for, you're paying for, it never...
Okay, a little aside here. You got to work on your American accent. You know, I'm not an American, but even I can do a much better accent than that. Yes, I go all over the place. I jump between Southerner to, New York, but I can do a much better American accent than Russell Brand can, and you got to work on that, man. It's not that hard. Like, it's a pretty easy accent to do an impression of. We got Seth here saying he frames it as the government and the legacy media teaming up, as opposed to the government using the available channels to transmit pro-social messaging. Yeah, like another great point. All of this is essentially paranoid framing, where it's just reading back stuff that is not evidence of a conspiracy, or not good or strong evidence of a conspiracy, such as the government using mainstream media to promote, good health policy and pro-social behaviors like taking the vaccine. Rather, he is just framing this in the most paranoid way possible about, the government being... it's essentially the intentionality bias, where you're just reading into it bad intentions without any kind of evidence. Sapira says, I also think it's interesting how he uses the term legacy media rather than something like mainstream, since his platform, YouTube, could be considered mainstream. This is something else I wanted to get into, is this concept of legacy media. I want to actually hear him comment on it first, and then I'm going to comment on what he means by that.
Wears off. It's 98% effective. Sorry. Look, don't ask questions about percentiles. What do you want us to start passing audits like the Pentagon? The Pentagon never pass audits, and they're not involved in the funding. Oh.
But they can restore their protection with an updated vaccine, because getting COVID again means risking long COVID or even hospitalization.
Let me know in the comments if you can think of any other situations that might lead to hospitalization or worse.
Get your updated vaccine, because COVID can be anywhere.
We can do this. That's their slogan. That, at least, I agree with. We can do this. We can do whatever the hell we want, and you'll pay for it. What an extraordinary world. What an extraordinary story. Let's look at the details now and see if it can help us adapt our worldview, awaken, and oppose the kind of corruption that seems all too present continually. Mainstream media is nearly monolithic. Okay, so we have I thought he would make another comment on it. I guess what he's about to read from might do that as well. But it's just one of these things where I find the concept of the legacy media, as it's going to say here, monolithically covering vaccines. And when they talk about the legacy media, they're usually talking about CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and even amongst those three, I'm sure there's
is Fox News and it going to be having the same attitudes towards COVID as MSNBC? Probably not. But there's like a large amount of other sources that aren't these like big corporate news outlets that, you know, are widely circulated and credible sources of news. So, for instance, Nature Magazine or Science.org or Johns Hopkins University News, or just going directly to like reputable journals. Like all of these are like news sources straight from, you know, academics and various reputable academic journals. And so I find it kind of funny that the language here doesn't actually do justice to how many different types of news sources actually can inform one that the vaccine is probably a very good idea for somebody to take. And so he's gonna start reading off this article, I believe, for like most of the rest of the video. And the first thing you'll notice is that if you look at the source, it says the illusion of consensus Substack. So Substack is kind of like WordPress, where it's like a blog website where you can make your own blog, and it just has like a feature of, I think, adding like a newsletter subscription service and a paywall. So essentially, the source that he's getting everything he's about to read from is from a guy's blog. Like, this is not an academic journal or like a piece of journalism. It's a guy's blog. And that would be like a perfect example of if somebody watched this and just took everything that was said in it and just accepted it and thought that Russell Brand had done justice to and like done the work to convince you of everything he's saying. You are like media illiterate. You are watching a guy read off a guy's blog without any, which is not actually, you know, sourcing any of the things that he's saying, at least in the video. And it really just shows, in my opinion, like an inability to draw your information from multiple sources.
Prolific coverage of mRNA vaccines and other COVID measures can be at least partially explained by a clear financial interest. Yes. Recently, a Freedom of Information Act request filed by the conservative media company, The Blaze, found a number of major media outlets were paid to promote the COVID vaccine. Such venues included, and get ready for a list of the usual suspects, The Washington Post, The Los Angeles Times, NBC, CNN, Fox News, and several others. Oh, the whole of the legacy media. The Blaze...
Yeah, again, it's like, well, what about like Nature Magazine? What about, you know, Science.org? What about all of these other news sources that cover things directly related to like what's going on in the scientific community? This idea of like the legacy media, I think, is an attempt to homogenize people that you disagree with as fitting into like one group in order to not have to engage with anything they're saying.
Blaze's report received little coverage, even in conservative media, perhaps because some of those outlets were also paid by HHS, the Department of Health and Human Services.
So that assumption that the reason that people don't cover what you're saying is because they were paid off without actually providing any kind of citation for that, or like even just explaining how you know that, I think is typical of like conspiracy thinking, right? Which is the use of ad hoc reasoning, where essentially adding postulates that aren't supported by the evidence in order to make your theory better, which is a bad recipe for a good belief system about the world. Yeah, let's continue.
Ideologically predisposed to criticise government-fueled narratives on the pandemic. As The Blaze reports, hundreds of news organisations were paid by the federal government to advertise for the vaccine as part of a comprehensive media campaign. This is a media campaign. It's comprehensive. Well, I can't comprehend it. It seems corrupt and incomprehensible. According to the documents the Blaze obtained from the Department of Health and Human Services, they have to use Freedom of Information Act rights and legislation to get it. This information is not freely available. You have to go, give us the information, come on, give it his freedom. You don't need this information. Can't we tell you in 75 years when you're all dead? The Biden administration purchased ads on TV, radio, in print and on social media to build vaccine confidence, timing this effort with the increasing availability of the vaccines. Vaccine confidence should be related to vaccine efficacy and transparency. Wouldn't you agree that your confidence in any government project ought to be based on transparency, authenticity, integrity? Or do you just want to be told stuff, denied access to all of the information, and shamed if you don't participate?
Okay, so far from what he is reading, and this is not a good assumption, but if we assume for the sake of argument that he's just reading like a very well-sourced, great article on, you know, how the government financed campaigns to promote the vaccine and other pro-social behaviors. None of this is actually evidence for anything nefarious. Like, it's completely expected in a global pandemic that governments would do this when they need to kind of promote and roll out a vaccine to fight a pandemic. And like I've already said this a few times now, it's literally just somebody's paranoia that is doing the work here to interpret this as actually evidence for, firstly, like the vaccine being inefficacious and you know, not worth getting or being a bad idea, or like a larger conspiracy, or even just like foul play on the part of the government. Like, none of this has actually evidenced any of those claims substantially. And if you're watching this and you don't already believe in the conspiracy or hold these types of paranoid beliefs, none of this is doing any persuasive work whatsoever.
The latter would be more effective and work more quickly. Well, just do that then. During the vaccine rollout, the Biden administration made a number of efforts to bolster vaccination rates. They certainly did. My God, do you remember all the dancing about, the musicals, the singing, the shaming? It was extraordinary. You've probably forgotten it's happened because you're traumatized and you've parked it somewhere. But believe me, it happened. The US Department of Health and Human Services COVID-19 public education campaign states they employed both paid advertising and media interviews, presentations, radio, TV tours, and other public events to educate people.
Okay, so I wanted to get into this next part of the video, which is an example, again, of how that I think very well highlights some of the styles of thinking that I'm trying to discourage here. And that's when he makes this claim. Okay.
Against long COVID and dated COVID vaccine. It falsely claims the new booster shot prevents long COVID and hospitalization when the only available evidence from Pfizer and Moderna are rat studies and a 50-person trial with an unexplained 2% rate of serious adverse events.
Okay, so it is not true that the only studies that show that the vaccine prevents long COVID and hospitalization are on rat studies. If you just literally Google this, you will find a wealth of literature on human trials that show that the vaccine prevents long COVID and hospitalization. There is an extreme wealth of data on this. And I'm not even going to like bring it up because it's a good practice for you if you're watching this and you hear what Russell Brand is saying and think, wow, like they only have rat studies to show that the vaccine prevents long COVID and hospitalization, to actually try to compare what Russell Brand is saying with other sources, to go onto Google and to try to find like what do other sources say about the vaccine's ability to prevent long COVID and hospitalization. That would be a good exercise for you, because literally you're just one Google search away from seeing that this is not the case. And that is what we mean when we talk about media illiteracy, is the fact that people who only draw their information from a narrow set of sources, namely these kind of like alternative media figures who promote conspiratorial beliefs, are media illiterate. Superior says, nobody has covered this. It's supposed to imply that it's been covered up, when in reality it's because it's actually mundane and only noteworthy from the conspiracy sort of view that he's promoting. Yeah, that was in line with the criticism that Then and Now made that I was trying to highlight, which is this idea that often they will take mundane news that are stories that aren't that interesting and try to spin it from the conspiracy worldview to show that this is some kind of cover-up, when it's actually just not interesting to most people. And this would be the same with the fact that the government paid media companies to spread pro-vaccine messaging. It's just not really that interesting. Like, I could have told you they were going to do that before the pandemic happened. If you told me in 2019, hey, there's going to be a global pandemic and they're going to have to roll out a vaccine in a very fast and timely manner, I could have just told you that that's what they would do. Like, it's totally expected and mundane news. How could they? Jake Adams has a great point. How could they even study hospitalizations in a rat study? His claim on its face makes no sense, lol. Are they going to hospitalize the rats? Yeah, like it's, I don't get that either. And you're just one Google search away from finding the evidence on this. So I don't think there's any point like going through the rest of the video. I think that this kind of suffices to see like what we're dealing with here. And so now I kind of wanted to move the discussion to kind of actually look through some of the data available on this stuff and what does the literature say on things like media literacy and these types of beliefs, right? And so the first thing that we find, right, is that so this goes again to this concept of epistemic arrogance, where a lot of people consume a lot of political content online and they believe falsely that this makes them a critical thinker or someone who is able to discern the truth from falsehood. And they actually find that it isn't necessarily the case that consuming political content on social media makes you more likely to be media literate. So for instance here, they use the word news literacy. This study finds news literacy and related orientations contribute to who is seeing and sharing information on social media, with those who are more knowledgeable about media structures seeing and sharing less content. And this actually goes into like a problem, or it can help us kind of think about and explain a problem, which is that more false news gets shared than good news, especially on social media like Facebook. This is talked about in the Then and Now video. And maybe a potential explanation for that is because the people who are likely to share and consume all of this political content on Facebook are actually less likely to be news literate. And so this is where the epistemic arrogance comes in. It's like, well, I've spent thousands of hours like watching Russell Brand videos, listening to the Joe Rogan podcast, sharing weird Facebook videos. I'm someone who's not an expert on this and knowledgeable about this, where it's actually, no, you don't have news literacy. You're not approaching these things from a critical perspective. And just because you've spent all that time doing that, when you're not actually reading like a wide range of sources, you're not reading academic journals, you're not actually engaging with the literature on this stuff, it doesn't actually mean you know what you're talking about. And so that's like that's a serious problem. And so what they actually find, just one moment. So what they actually find, right, is that the more media literate somebody is, the more able they are to discern truth from falsehood when they're presented with like false news stories and true news stories. And the more range of information they consume, and the more critical and skeptical they are, the less likely they are to be persuaded by negative coverage of the COVID vaccination. And the more likely they are to be persuaded by positive coverage. And they also find that being more news literate correlates directly with being more likely to engage in these pro-social behaviors like taking the vaccine, social distancing, and so on. And I actually do think this is concerning to somebody, or it should be concerning to somebody who is, say, a fan of Russell Brand. Now, if you watch this and you're like fully lost in the source with the COVID conspiracy, like none of this is really, with a few exceptions, has actually been like addressing the things that you believe. And you might think like, oh, this is just like an ad hominem fallacy. Like you're just saying like people who disagree with me are not media literate. But it actually is some evidence that the conspiratorial kind of views that Russell Brand promotes are wrong. And I want to kind of explain why. And it's not conclusive evidence, but it is something that you should be engaging with and concerned about. And that is because, like, I'll use an analogy. We think that being news illiterate is undesirable. It's something where you want to actually, spend a lot of time researching and being critical and skeptical of the media, not just the media you don't like, and being completely uncritical of the media you do like, as Josh Rasmussen said in his video on tribalism. You want to be critical of all media and consume a wide range of sources and kind of be skeptical. That's a good thing, to be media literate. And it's a bad thing to be media illiterate. And if we find that certain views directly correlate with being media illiterate, that should be some evidence against those views being good views. Let's take another example. What's another undesirable trait? Let's use like something that's extreme just to illustrate the point. Let's say, I don't know, pedophilia. That's a bad thing. We don't like that. That is an immoral thing. And I'm not trying to say that people who are media illiterate are on par with pedophiles. I'm actually just making a point that if we found that a certain view was, that being a pedophile predicted belief in a certain view, we would think, oh, hang on, that is probably good, like some evidence that view is bad. Like let's say, or wrong or not true. Let's say you believe something and you find out, hey, the majority of other people who believe this are all pedophiles. That should be concerning to you. You should question that belief. That should be some evidence that your belief is bad and not a good explanation of the world. So when it comes to media illiteracy, we would say like, well, similarly, this is not a good thing. We want people to be media literate. And so if media literacy predicts, different views to your own, maybe you should do a bit more work to engage with those views and see and explore the question of like, well, why is that the case? Again, it's not conclusive proof that you're wrong, but it is something that you should consider, and it should drive you to maybe be a bit less confident in your own views and to take other views more seriously. Now, so we see that, there's a few sources I had up that I thought were interesting that I wanted to look at. Like we see that in this study, this was the one that I referenced before, that the more media literate somebody is, the more likely they are to conform to like government recommended COVID measures. And then I think so. Now what I wanted to move into is another facet of these kinds of beliefs, right? Because when they actually have a lot of literature on the personality traits that predict conspiracy theories. And so something I want to say is I don't actually think being a conspiracy theorist makes somebody stupid. They don't really find that intelligence predicts these or is not predictive, or I don't think there is a correlation between being intelligent and being a conspiracy theorist. I know a few conspiracy theorists who are much smarter than me, I would say, where I talk to them and I think like, okay, your like brain processing power is better than mine. Yet they believe in these conspiracy theories because of other traits that they have, which actually kind of makes their intelligence, in my opinion, more of like a vice for them. Like if you combine intelligence with other bad traits, it can actually make those bad traits worse for you, like for instance, a highly intelligent serial killer or something like that. And it's the same with conspiracy theories a lot of the time, because the biggest predictor of being conspiracy theorists from a personality standpoint is narcissism. It is an extremely robust predictor, and they find it again and again in the literature. And this is something that kind of shocks people. They hear this and they might not intuitively get why that's the case, but once you look into it, it actually makes a lot of sense. And it's something that very much conforms to, I think, most people's anecdotal experience, for whatever that's worth, with conspiracy types. And it's because fundamentally, at the root of narcissism is this belief about one's superiority and the belief that they are special and unique. And ultimately, what you find with conspiracy theorists is that the main motivation stems from this desire to believe that they are better than others. Like, if you look at all of the comments on these like Russell Brand videos, they typically come from not a place of like believing in the well-being of others, but more so showing that they weren't duped like everybody else was. Everyone else is a sheep. They went along with this like nepotistic plan by the government because they are gullible and stupid. But they are like the critical thinking truth seekers. And you even saw this in the beginning of Russell Brand's video, where he goes on about how we're on this like voyage of truth and so on. And a lot of the reason that's seductive to people is because it allows them to kind of say that when they go out into public and, they go on the bus and they look around at everybody, they think, look at all of these sheep, like I am special and I am superior to these people because I didn't fall for the conspiracy, especially when they're looking at people wearing masks and so on in the context of what we're talking about with the vaccine and COVID. And so ultimately that's the main motivation that they find in the literature when they study this. It's not just speculating about like baseless speculation. It is the single biggest personality predictor of believing in a conspiracy theory. And a lot of another way that it's quite narcissistic is because of this belief in having special knowledge. A lot of the we have superior doing this. I've never heard of that correlation. It is really interesting and does make a lot of sense. Yeah, it is well studied. It is something that they find over and over again, and it's very easy to be replicated. And I could have gotten up like the studies that show this. This study here like references, literally like over a dozen of these studies that show this. But what I find interesting about this one is this one's not really a study. It's more of an article that is trying to build a causal model based on other studies for like how the interaction between narcissism and conspiracy theories. And you can see here there's a bunch of the traits of narcissism, and it kind of tries to show how they lead to conspiratorial beliefs. So here you have grandiose and vulnerable. Just for people who don't know, vulnerable narcissism is characterized by introversion, negative emotions, interpersonal coldness, hostility, need for recognition, entitlement, and egocentricity. While grandiose narcissism is characterized by dominance, self-assurance, immodesty, exhibitionism, and aggression, and exhibitionism doesn't mean getting naked. It means like wanting to show off and brag and things like that. And so you can kind of see here with this chart, it's kind of showing different traits that correlate with both grandiose and vulnerable, or features of them rather, and then how they kind of play out in the underlying emotional needs that make a conspiracy theory persuasive to somebody. And so you can kind of see here that gullibility is up there. And this is another thing which is very ironic, is that people who are narcissistic tend to have a high opinion of their ability to think critically about an issue, right? They tend to think that they are very intelligent, critical thinkers, while everybody else is gullible and sheepish. But they find that people who are narcissistic actually tend to be a lot more gullible than the rest of the population. And it's precisely because of their epistemic arrogance, so the inflation of their own knowledge and expertise on an issue, and the lack of ability for narcissistic people to critically assess themselves and think like, oh, like, I was wrong there, this is a weakness of mine, and that ability to criticize oneself. Because with grandiose narcissists, criticism kind of just rolls off them, like they don't respond to it. And then with vulnerable narcissists, they tend to be hypersensitive to criticism, where it's like a stab in the heart for them. And either way, that facet of narcissism where you don't respond well to criticism is going to make someone more gullible. And you can also see with epistemic arrogance, it has that interplay with being media illiterate, where you believe that, for instance, consuming Facebook media and not actually putting in the work to look at the whole literature on an issue and look at a wide array of information, you think that you are really knowledgeable on this, because when actually you have like a very one-sided perspective on this, and it's not the perspective that an expert would have. I have a funny anecdote where during COVID lockdowns, one of the only things we could do was go for walks, where you could go for a walk with one other person, and you weren't allowed to hang out in big groups, but you could go for a walk with someone for exercise purposes. And the person that I would go for a walk with a lot was a full-blown COVID conspiracy theorist, and this was all we spoke about. He was like unable to have a conversation about anything else. Like, all roads led to this COVID conspiracy. And when he would say stuff where he'd be like, well, if you're vaccinated though, why do I have to get the vaccine? You're protected. And it would just like show that he's ignorant on these basic concepts like herd immunity and so on. And then I would push back. He would always have to go to this like, well, I've researched this a lot, okay? And this kind of like posturing themselves as an expert, when it's like consuming, like, you're media illiterate. You just consume Facebook videos and like this, people from your own side. You don't think critically about it. You're only capable of having this like extremely critical perspective of people who you don't agree with, and it's not done in good faith. And you're going through that process of being partisan sorted, which is by alternative media figures who are conditioning you to not be able to entertain people you disagree with in good faith, making you contempt and loathe people you don't like, and then having this arrogant view where you believe you're an expert on it because of all that time you've spent consuming these media sources, which don't in fact make you more media literate. I have Sapira saying, I feel like you're describing Peter Boghossian. Yeah, I actually don't know much about him, even though I am a big fan of Digital Gnosis, and he has challenged him a lot recently. I haven't actually watched much of his stuff. Yeah, so I can't comment on that, but, I'll take... I will take your word for it and trust what you're saying, because you're one of my guys, you're on my team, and but just kidding. But yeah, it is. I need to look into him more, because he's somebody who's people have been kind of concerned about recently, and got to do it due diligence before I form an opinion. Yeah, and so one of the other things about narcissism that predicts conspiratorial ideation or beliefs in conspiracy theories is paranoia. Narcissists struggle with paranoia. It's something where they tend to have this belief that other people are malicious and out to get them. And there's different reasons why somebody could have this type of belief. One could be just like a projection of one's own like narcissism, where from a lot of narcissists, their perspective is that they are very competitive, where, you know, they need to prove their superiority to other people, and they're often willing to do like Machiavellian tactics in order to achieve that. And if that's how you are, you can, and you're someone who struggles with like empathizing and understanding people's perspective, which is like another narcissistic trait, it's quite likely that then you could like believe everybody else operates like that as well, and that's going to create like a very paranoid world, right, where people are all like out to get each other. And yeah, and there's a few reasons why people think that's the case, but it tends to be that people who are narcissistic are very paranoid. And it's plausible then to think that this kind of paranoia on the individual level can then kind of spill over to beliefs about society, and that kind of paranoia that, well, it's not just my work colleagues that are out to get me. Like if I hear about, you know, a group that tries to, you know, combat misinformation or something like that, that it's likely that they operate on this same level as well. Or like, let's take the Russell Brand example. The government funding, you know, a campaign to get people to try to take a booster shot. It's like, well, if I'm narcissistic, it's likely that other people are narcissistic, and, you know, it's likely that these people are competing with me, and it's a zero-sum game, and if I do what they say, I lose, and I need to maintain my supremacy. That paranoia, that's quite intuitive, I feel. I think a lot of people can see how being paranoid could lead one to believe in a conspiracy theory. There's also this other concept that I haven't seen spoken about as much, which is the idea of group narcissism. So someone actually need not be narcissistic about themselves and believe in a conspiracy theory because maybe they exhibit what's called group narcissism, which is essentially where you take a lot of those traits that an individual who's narcissistic has, but you apply them to like the group that you belong to. And I can imagine that, so for instance, like, let's say I'm in the alt-right, and I think the alt-right is like special, unique, supreme to any other perspective, like a zero-sum game competition with other groups, and so on and so forth. And I think a reason why someone could be a group narcissist and not an individual narcissist, and like this is me speculating, could be due to having traits that kind of make you like vulnerable to people who are narcissistic themselves, you know, where they tell you like, I have it all figured out, and, you know, you need to follow me in order to, for your own good, and you can't figure out the world for yourself. And so they kind of like and so maybe they have low self-esteem, and they try to like, you know, feel better about themselves by belonging to a group that they think very highly of. Needs for dominance and control. This is another thing that was brought up in the Then and Now video. And you know, a deep part of what it means to be a narcissist is to have this deep-seated need for dominance and control. You know, for instance, being the smartest person in the room and not being challenged by other people who you know, stuff like that. And so with conspiracy theories, like these kind of offer a means of control in a kind of roundabout way, because the world is a chaotic and scary place where a lot of stuff happens without very clear or good explanations, right? People suffer in geopolitical events, and a lot of the times the reasons are just kind of bizarre. Take 9/11, you know, where you have over, you know, a bunch of hijackers who are kind of radicalized into a belief system from the Middle East, and they hijack a plane, and from that you have these giant wars in the Middle East that kill a lot of people. And that's, you know, a very scary and chaotic situation. And so people kind of get this sense of control by having a lot more of like an airtight explanation that kind of goes beyond the evidence. But also I would add to this that people who have this deep-seated need for dominance and control are often attracted to people like Russell Brand and these big people who have a lot of influence over others, because it's a means of living vicariously through someone else, where you as a person who doesn't really have much control in your own life, you are a spectator, you don't influence policy. To a large extent, it doesn't really matter like what side you bat for. Like, you know, you're just like a small speck in the cosmic eye and all of that stuff. And so when you can kind of like live vicariously through somebody who does have political influence by siding with them and believing that you're on the same team as them, it definitely satisfies that deep-seated need that a lot of people have. I might just play the section from the Then and Now video on dominance and control. He's also going to make an interesting point where he shows that if you actually look at people like Russell Brand, Joe Rogan, and Jordan Peterson, these are people who struggle with vices, where in Jordan Peterson and Russell Brand's case, it's a form of addiction. And, you know, with Joe Rogan as well, he's had his own kind of battles too, where he goes on to make this point that they seem to be people who are actually susceptible to this need more so than the rest of the population. And, you know, there might be a bit of like psychoanalysis there, but I think it's an interesting point. I gotta find where this was at. I might actually not do that. I think I kind of explained some of this. But yeah, this is a very interesting study. It kind of goes through like a lot of the different traits that narcissists have, and it kind of shows again how it's a predictor for conspiratorial beliefs. The need for uniqueness. I have special knowledge that other people don't have. You're all wearing your masks. Well, for me, I know the truth. Paranoia, like that sense of like that it's kind of this almost like essential nature that people are in competition and out to get each other. The need for dominance and control, wanting to like live vicariously through media figures who have political influence, to feel like you have some kind of influence over the chaotic society that we live in. And gullibility, the lack of ability to be critical of oneself because of that heightened sense of superiority and belief that you're special and unique. And these things lead to conspiratorial beliefs, and they find in the literature time and time again that narcissism is one of the best predictors of being a conspiracy theorist. And this should be concerning for you if you believe these things, again, because we would say that being narcissistic is undesirable. They find that it's bad for the narcissistic person. It leads to bad outcomes, low quality relationships, and it hurts the people around you. And so because we believe narcissism is undesirable, if an undesirable trait is a predictor of a belief, that should be some evidence against that belief. If you believe something and you found out that like being a pedophile or some other horrible thing was, not that being a narcissist is as bad as that, but again, just to show that if you found that predicted your belief system, you would want to then think, well, why do I believe this? Why do people who have this undesirable trait also believe this as well? And it should be evidence that, I think it's some evidence against the view. If conspiracy theories were true, it would be surprising that people who are narcissistic are the people most likely to believe this. I don't think you would find that if these conspiracy theories were really strong, good beliefs. And then I guess like one last thing I wanted to end with is like we talk a lot about this idea of a conspiracy theory, and I touched on this before. I think ultimately, like we talk about media illiteracy epistemic arrogance, narcissism, a lot of these are going to kind of come down, kind of give us insight into what I think is one of the most defining points of being a conspiracy theorist, and like what makes a conspiracy theory. And I don't think it is just a belief about a conspiracy. I think it's a style of belief that captures these things we've been talking about. And ultimately, the reasons why these are issues is because they make someone unable to really compare their worldview with other worldviews and judge them on their explanatory merits, like how parsimonious they are, lack of ad hoc reasoning, explanatory power, and so on. They're not going to be able to do that. And it's because that being epistemically arrogant and having that media illiteracy, this is going to lead to something known as being epistemically insulated. We're throwing that word epistemically around a lot. It just means like to do with what you know and knowledge. And when you're epistemically insulated, you aren't exposed to what people have to say about your own worldview who don't agree with you. And you're unable to compare other people's beliefs with your own in a good faith way and be able to assess them on their virtues. So for instance, like if you took one of the people in the comments there who had watched that Russell Brand video and wanted to tell you that there's only rat studies on hospitalization, which again, as Jake Adams pointed out, doesn't really even make sense. Do you think they would have Googled that and then been able to tell you about the data on human trials about like long COVID and hospitalization and how the vaccine reduces these things? Do you think they would be able to like predict what comes up when you Google it and the other data available? Like, no, they wouldn't, because they are media illiterate, epistemically arrogant, and insulated from competing belief systems and perspectives. And I think this is really what defines a conspiracy theory and why it is still a useful word to try to pick out this style of thinking. And yeah, I got a Sapira saying, please share these sources with me as well. I will do. I will post them to you. I also have my own Discord server where I have stream notes where I post these as well, but I'll send them to you too. But you know, we've been going now for like an hour and 20 minutes. So I'm going to leave it there, guys. This was a bit rambly. I kind of just wanted to have a discussion about some of these ideas because I find them interesting. Wasn't something that, I'm still getting used to a lot of the streaming stuff, so I don't like having this like strict formula, but eventually I might get there. It's always good to interact with everybody. Thanks to everybody for sticking around in the chat. Appreciate you guys and gals. But I literally know everybody in the chat and they're all guys. So, thanks for watching, everybody. I'm going to end it there. And yeah, appreciate everybody sticking around. Have a good one, guys.